Welcome back to the Political Pulse, your trusted source for navigating the whirlwind of U.S. politics with a dash of humor and a sprinkle of sanity. I'm Andrew Carter.
And I'm Rachel Bennett. Each week, we sift through the chaos to bring you the stories that matter and the ones that make you wonder if we're all living in a political sitcom.
All right, so I don't know about you, but this past week has been absolutely wild.
It really has.
It's like trying to keep up with everything going on in politics and everything happening with all these different companies.
Yeah,
It's exhausting.
it is a lot.
I mean, you want to be informed, but I also want to, have a life outside of the constant news cycle,
Absolutely. And that's kind of what we do here, right?
well,
Cut through all the noise and really focus on what actually matters, what's actually significant, and what's going to have lasting impact.
Yes, so consider this like your cheat sheet to understanding what's going on in the world.
A curated deep dive
Precisely a curated deep dive.
into the most important stuff.
Yeah. So this week we're going to dive deep into a few different things, starting with the potential Social Security shutdown.
Yeah, this was a close one.
Oh my gosh, that was a huge scare. And then we'll talk about what happened with Paul Weiss, this major law firm, and the pressure they've been under.
Uh-huh.
We'll also look at what Bernie Sanders and Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez are up to with their new rally tour.
They're trying to make some moves.
They are trying to shake things up,
Yeah.
for sure. And then there's this really interesting case involving a law from the 18th century, the Alien Enemies Act, being used in a very modern context.
Yeah, very unexpected.
Totally unexpected. We'll also touch on what's happening at Columbia University with some changes they're making. And then, of course, the never-ending saga of Tesla.
Always something happened over there.
Always something. And we'll wrap things up by looking at these crazy town hall meetings that are happening all over the country.
Yeah, those have been getting pretty heated.
Understatement.
Yeah, a lot of tension.
So it's a lot, but all of these stories, they're not just random events. They're actually connected in really interesting ways, and they reveal a lot about what's going on beneath the surface.
Yeah, I think they really expose these underlying tensions that we're seeing in society right now.
Definitely. So let's start with the Social Security thing, because that was really scary.
Okay, so basically the acting commissioner of Social Security, Leland Dudek, actually considered shutting down the entire program for a while.
I mean, can you imagine?
It would have been chaos.
It would have affected like 70 million people.
That's right. Millions of Americans rely on Social Security.
Yeah, and they just wouldn't have gotten their benefits.
Exactly. So why was he even considering this, you might ask?
Yeah, what on earth was going on there?
Well, it all started with a federal judge restricting the Department of Government Efficiency's access to data from the Social Security Administration.
DOGE,
Oh,
right?
yeah, DOGE.
And that's the department that Elon Musk is running.
That's right. He's at the helm over there.
So they wanted to use this data to look for inefficiencies and fraud, which, sounds like a good thing in theory.
Right. On the surface, it seems like they're trying to make the system better.
Yeah, but the court was concerned about privacy.
Exactly. They were worried about DOGE having this sort of unbridled access to people's personal information.
Yeah, which is totally understandable.
Absolutely. There are laws in place, like the Privacy Act, to protect that kind of data.
Right, and so the judge issued a temporary restraining order to block DOGE from accessing the data.
Uh-huh. And this is where the whole thing gets really interesting.
Yeah, because Dudek, the acting commissioner, he interpreted this restraining order to mean that Social Security couldn't operate at all.
Yeah, he basically thought his hairs were tied.
I mean, that's a pretty extreme interpretation.
It is, and it caused a lot of panic.
Understandably so.
Yeah, I mean, people were freaking out, rightfully so.
But luckily, the court clarified its ruling.
They basically said, hey, we're not shutting down Social Security, just limiting DOGE's access.
Yeah, so Dudek was able to back down from that shutdown threat.
Thankfully.
Thank goodness. But it really makes you think, doesn't it?
About
how vulnerable these systems are
Uh-huh.
and how easily things could just fall apart.
Yeah, it really highlights the importance of finding the right balance between efficiency and privacy.
Totally, because you want the government to be efficient, but you also don't want them snooping around in your personal data.
Absolutely, it's a delicate balance.
Okay, so let's move on to this whole Paul Weiss situation, because that was a really big deal.
Okay, so we have President Trump issuing an executive order against this massive law firm, Paul Weiss.
It's not every day that you see something like that happen.
No, it's pretty unusual.
Yeah, so what was this executive order all about? What did it actually do?
Well, it did a lot. It revoked their security clearances, it terminated all their federal contracts, and it even banned their employees from entering any federal buildings.
Wow. I mean, that's pretty drastic.
It's a pretty big hammer to drop.
It is. So what was the reason behind all of this?
Well, the administration was accusing Paul Weiss of discrimination against their employees,
Discrimination based on what?
based on race and other protected categories.
That's serious.
It is, and in response, Paul, Weiss made some pretty big concessions to get this executive order lifted.
Like that whole free legal services thing?
Yeah, they basically pledged $40 million worth of pro bono legal services to causes that the administration supports.
Which is interesting because usually law firms get to choose their pro bono work.
Right, they get to decide which causes they want to support. But in this case, they had to agree to work on cases that the administration favored.
That's a pretty big compromise.
It is. And they also agreed to have an audit done to basically dismantle their diversity and inclusion initiatives.
Which is pretty shocking considering how much emphasis has been placed on diversity in the legal profession recently.
Right, it goes against the current trend.
Yeah, so this whole thing has really sent shockwaves through the legal world.
Oh, absolutely.
People are worried about what this means for the independence of law firms and the legal profession in general.
Yeah, is this a sign of things to come? Will other firms face similar pressure from the administration?
Exactly. It's a really concerning situation.
It is, and it's going to be interesting to see how this all plays out in the long run.
All right, so let's switch gears again and talk about Bernie Sanders and AOC.
Okay, so they've teamed up for this Fighting Oligarchy rally tour, which is a pretty bold statement right off the bat.
It is. It's pretty clear what they're going for.
Yeah, they're not trying to be subtle.
So what's the goal here?
Well, they're trying to energize the Democratic base, bring people together.
Because it feels like the Democratic Party has been kind of fractured lately.
Right. There's been a lot of infighting.
Yeah, so Sanders and AOC are trying to unify the party around a common message.
Which is?
Basically, they're saying that we need to fight economic inequality and protect working families.
Yeah, they're really emphasizing this idea of a class struggle, the haves versus the have-nots.
And they're focusing on issues that directly affect people's lives, like healthcare and education.
Yeah, bread and butter issues.
Exactly. Things that everyone can relate to.
Right. They're trying to appeal to a broad range of voters.
And they're specifically calling out the influence of the wealthy and powerful.
Hence the fighting oligarchy theme.
Right. They're saying that the system is rigged against everyday people.
So it'll be interesting to see how this resonates with voters.
Yeah. Will they be able to bring the Democratic Party together under this banner?
Only time will tell.
Okay, now this Alien Enemies Act thing, this was really fascinating to me.
Yeah, it's not every day that a law from the 18th century gets dragged back into the spotlight.
So what's going on here? Why is this law suddenly relevant?
Well, the administration is trying to use it to deport members of this gang called Tren de Aragua,
Which is?
a pretty violent criminal organization that originated in Venezuela.
And they're saying this gang poses a threat to national security.
That's their justification.
Okay, so how does this 18th century law even apply to this situation?
Well, the Alien Enemies Act basically gives the president a lot of power to detain and deport non-citizens during times of war or when there's a perceived threat to national security.
But we're not at war with Venezuela.
Right, and that's where the legal debate comes in.
Because people are saying that this law is outdated and shouldn't be applied in this context.
Yeah, they're arguing that it violates due process rights.
And a federal judge actually blocked these deportations, right?
He did. Judge James Boasberg issued a temporary restraining order.
And he didn't hold back in his criticism of the administration's legal team.
No, he called them out for being disrespectful and using inappropriate language in court.
Which is pretty rare for a judge to do so publicly.
It is. It suggests that he was really troubled by their behavior and their arguments.
And the ACLU is involved too, right?
Yeah, they're representing the people who are facing deportation.
And they're arguing that using the Alien Enemies Act in this way is unconstitutional.
Right. They say it violates people's fundamental rights.
So this case could have really big implications for immigration policy.
Absolutely. It could set a precedent for how this law is interpreted and applied in the future.
And raises questions about how far the government can go in the name of national security.
Exactly. It's a delicate balance.
Okay, let's move on to what's happening at Columbia University.
So Columbia recently agreed to a bunch of demands in order to get back $400 million in federal funding.
$400 million? That's a lot of money.
It's a huge chunk of their budget.
So what were these demands all about?
Well, the Department of Education had withheld the funding because of allegations of anti-Semitism on campus.
So they were basically saying, clean up your act or you don't get the money.
Pretty much. And Columbia agreed to implement some pretty big changes.
Like what?
Well, they agreed to adopt a specific definition of anti-Semitism.
Which I guess is meant to address the concerns about anti-Semitism on campus.
Right, it's supposed to make it clear what constitutes anti-Semitic behavior.
Okay, what else?
They also agreed to expand their Israel and Jewish Studies Institute,
Okay.
and they're going to put the Middle East Studies Department under new supervision.
Interesting. Anything else?
Yeah, they also agreed to implement stricter rules for protests and student discipline.
Oh, like what?
Well, one of the most controversial changes is a ban on face masks on campus.
Wow, that's pretty extreme.
It is. They're saying it's for safety reasons, but a lot of people are seeing it as a way to crack down on dissent.
Because protesters often wear masks.
Exactly. So this has caused a lot of debate about free speech and academic freedom.
Yeah, some people are saying that Columbia is caving to government pressure and sacrificing its principles.
And others are saying that these changes are necessary to create a more inclusive and tolerant campus environment.
It's a really complex issue with no easy answers.
It is, and it raises questions about the role of government in higher education.
All right, let's talk about Tesla now, because they've been having a rough time lately.
Yeah, they're facing a whole bunch of problems, from product recalls to vandalism.
So what's going on with the recalls?
Well, the biggest one is for the Cybertruck.
Tesla's new pickup truck.
Right, the one that's supposed to be indestructible.
Well, apparently not so indestructible.
Yeah, the NHTSA found a problem with an exterior panel that could potentially detach while the truck is driving.
Which is obviously a major safety hazard.
Right, you don't want parts of your truck flying off on the highway.
No, definitely not. So they're recalling a lot of these Cybertrucks to fix the problem.
Yeah, it's a pretty big setback for Tesla.
And then on top of that, they're dealing with all this vandalism.
Yeah, it's been pretty bad.
Like, what happened?
Well, in Las Vegas, someone set a bunch of Teslas on fire at a service center and spray painted "resist" on the building.
That's scary.
It is. It seems like a targeted attack.
Definitely not random vandalism.
No, it seems very intentional.
And then there was that incident in Belfast, right?
Yeah, 20 Teslas were vandalized there.
It's like people are taking out their frustrations on Tesla.
It seems that way.
And I saw that the Attorney General, Pam Bondi, called the Las Vegas attack domestic terrorism.
Which is a pretty strong statement.
It is. It shows how seriously they're taking these incidents.
Yeah, it's not just kids messing around. This is something more organized and potentially dangerous.
And Tesla owners are understandably worried.
Yeah, they're concerned about their cars being targeted and their insurance rates going up.
Some of them are even thinking about removing the Tesla branding from their cars.
Which is pretty extreme.
It shows how much the brand image has been tarnished by these incidents.
Yeah, it's definitely hurting their reputation.
Okay, last but not least, let's talk about these town hall meetings.
All right, so all across the country, Republican lawmakers are facing a lot of anger from their constituents at these town hall meetings.
It's not just the usual partisan bickering. It seems like there's a real sense of betrayal.
Yeah, a lot of voters feel like the Republicans aren't representing their interests anymore.
And one of the most explosive town halls was Representative Harriet Hageman's in Wyoming.
Yeah, that one was a disaster.
What happened?
Well, people were furious about a lot of things, especially the fight over Social Security.
They felt like Hageman wasn't doing enough to protect their benefits.
Right, and when she tried to talk about common sense reforms...
Which is pretty vague.
Very vague. Yeah, people started yelling at her, calling her a coward.
It sounds pretty intense.
Oh, it was. People were shouting things like, "You work for us, not for Trump."
Which shows how much Trump still has a hold on the Republican Party.
Yeah, it's a big factor in these town halls.
And it's not just Hageman. Other Republican lawmakers are facing similar backlash.
Yeah, Scott Perry in Pennsylvania got grilled about Veterans Affairs funding.
And Byron Donalds in Florida was confronted about education policy.
It's a nationwide trend.
So what does this all mean?
Well, it suggests that there's a growing rift between Republican lawmakers and their base.
Yeah, and with the 2026 midterms coming up,
This could spell trouble for the Republicans.
it's definitely something to keep an eye on.
Absolutely.
So there you have it, a whirlwind tour of the week's most significant events.
From Social Security scares to legal battles, from progressive rallies to resurrected laws, from campus controversies to electric vehicle troubles, and from fiery town halls to the shifting political landscape.
It's been a lot to process.
It has, but it's important to connect the dots and see how these seemingly separate events are actually intertwined.
Yeah, they're all part of a bigger story about the tensions and challenges we're facing as a society.
And that's what we do here on The Deep Dive. We help you understand that broad story.
We cut through the noise and give you the context you need to make sense of it all.
So as you go about your week, consider this. Given all the pushback we're seeing at town halls and the concessions we're seeing from institutions like Paul, Weiss, and Columbia University, what does this tell us about the changing power dynamics in our society? Who really holds the power? Is it the government, corporations, or the people?
It's a question worth pondering.
It is, and it's a question that we'll continue to explore in future deep dives. All right, that's a wrap on this week's Political Pulse. Remember, we're bringing you 2 podcasts a week, this weekly recap plus a deep dive where we break down one major story with all the nuance and snark it deserves.
And when breaking news hits, you know we'll be dropping emergency episodes to keep you updated, because the news cycle never sleeps, and neither do we. Don't forget to subscribe and catch us next time for another round of political chaos.
Until then, stay informed and stay sane.
See you next time.
Bye, everyone.